we're going to talk about how to encourage native landscapes, and it turns out not just in the HOA neighborhoods, but it's true in cities too, with city codes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What I want you to know is that all of the pictures in this presentation, or almost all of them, were taken either in an HOA neighborhood, mostly mine. I live in Lantana, which has, a really strong HOA, or else in suburban neighborhoods in the surrounding area, and all of them have some sort of landscape codes. So I just want to show you that it can be done. These section breaks, these title slides like this one, the background of it is actually our Monarch Way station here in Lantana. It's right next to our most heavily used building, our event center, and it's an all native pollinator garden. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. So what are native plants? And a native plant is just one that's been in that particular place without any human introduction. It wasn't brought in from Europe or even from Wisconsin. It's something that has grown up and was never introduced here in Texas. Our native pollinators and insects and other wildlife have all evolved along with these native plants. So they recognize them, they know them as food, as shelter, nesting material, and nesting sites. So most importantly, they recognize them as useful. And that isn't always true of non-native plants. They don't always recognize them, and often they don't recognize them as being useful to them. So our native plants have adapted to our sometimes challenging Texas environment. And I don't know why I said sometimes challenging. It's always challenging, but mostly because they have really deep root systems, which lets the plant find water from deep underground. But those deep roots are also important because it helps water that does fall infiltrate into the soil rather than running off the ground. So, and less runoff is important, especially if you're putting chemicals or anything else on the ground. Also, it increases carbon sequestration, which helps with climate change. It holds that carbon deep underground where it won't be released into the atmosphere. And it improves the soil quality because of the deep underground roots that, they grow and they die and they grow and they die, and it adds the organic material deep underground to help improve the soil quality. But most importantly, they don't require as much supplemental water. And that's important to our pocketbooks because we don't have to pay as much for the water. And it's also important because, you might find it odd that water companies keep encouraging don't water, right? Because you would think that we would get our money from people increasing their water. Well, we are running out of water. We're having to build reservoirs. It takes years and years and years to build a new reservoir, and people object to them. And there's a lot of reasons not to do that, to use what we have. So the fact that these are water-wise plants becomes really important as time goes on. So we hear HOAs object, but there's a lot of benefits to native landscapes, to an HOA neighborhood or any neighborhood. And it's not just HOAs. Most importantly, it increases the biodiversity. If something attacks a plant like rose rosette, I put here, emerald ash borer is another example of something that is going to decimate our ash trees. So if it attacks one plant, it won't wipe out the entire landscape. And also, having a native landscape with a variety of plants, it offers a buffet to the native creatures that come around and want to use it, whether it's bees, butterflies, rabbits, whatever. It's something that they understand. The birds, actually, a lot of these landscapes really benefit birds as well. Again, it reduces the water usage because these plants are adapted to our periods of flood and drought. You know, we think about the drought periods, but we also have times when we just flood. So every drought seems to be broken by a flood. So, but the drought is especially important because there are way more native plants killed by overwatering than underwatering. Also, growing native plants reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides because the native plants have evolved with the insects that are in that region. So even though those insects there may be insects that attack the plants, there's usually a predator insect that will come along and take care of the ones that are attacking it. I have a milkweed plant in my yard, the native butterfly weed that the aphids seem to love. But I learned finally that if I just leave it alone, the predators will come along and eat those aphids, the things like the ladybugs and assassin bugs and things like that will come along and eat them and basically take care of the problem for me. So it might take, a couple of weeks or so, but eventually they're gone. And the native plants are adapted to our area's soil conditions. So no matter how crummy our soil is, I complain about our lousy clay soil where I live. But you know what? I can chisel a hole in the ground, plop a plant in, and it will grow. It's always a miracle to me. Also, it lowers our maintenance costs. Of course, there's the cost savings on water bills, but also just general yard maintenance. We don't have to pay for a lot of extra fertilizer or pesticides, things like that. I'll throw down a good organic fertilizer now and then, but because my landscape is a certified wildlife habitat that attracts birds and pollinators, I don't even use any pesticides because if I use it for one thing, chances are good it'll kill something else. So other advantages might include, basically we're conserving our ever diminishing water resources during drought periods. We come dangerously close to shutting down water systems sometimes because the demand for water is so high during drought periods, mostly to water our lawns. So it helps us get away from that. Also helps, as I said before, it helps prevent surface water from running off. And often that surface water is full of harmful chemicals and things that we don't want in our water supply. Just the fact that it attracts beautiful butterflies, hummingbirds, and other wildlife to our yards, that alone, I think, makes it worth it. Also, it actually increases the aesthetic value and curb appeal if native plantings are done properly. It actually, they can be real showstoppers. And then there's just the pride in knowing that you're doing something to protect and beautify our community. I think that's actually really important also. So if there's all those benefits and it actually increases curb appeal or can increase curb appeal, why in the heck do HOAs say no to native landscaping? Well, let's talk first about HOAs. They're here to stay. Everybody complains about their HOA, except that there are benefits to HOAs as well. It's estimated that about a quarter of the U.S. population lives in an HOA neighborhood, and actually that probably nationwide is increasing. And in most parts of Texas, at least the urban parts of Texas, that percentage is probably higher because the cities more and more are requiring any new development to be governed by an HOA. Part of that is it's a great benefit to the cities because they don't have to do code enforcement. The HOA does the code enforcement for the city. But HOAs aren't just here for code enforcement. Well, they are, but it exists to protect the homeowner's investment. And that is actually a really important thing. Most people end up buying in an HOA neighborhood because it's so attractive, and they'll maybe pay a little bit more for what the HOA has to offer. Studies have shown that property values in HOA neighborhoods are 5 to 6% more than in a non-HOA neighborhood. So when you go to sell your house, that's an extra $25,000 on a $500,000 house. So that's a pretty significant impact to your own personal bottom line. But why do HOAs resist encouraging native landscapes? Well, the biggest reason is that first one. HOAs just favor uniformity in landscapes. They want to see those wide expanses of mowed, green, non-native turf grasses that require so much water. They want to see similar shrubs in front of all the houses, all trimmed into their neat little rectangles or neat little balls. And HOAs will often have lists of approved plants, and they're often made up mainly of non-natives because that's what the developer or their landscaper knows. They're most familiar with that, although that's changing. The people on boards often think of native landscapes as weedy or unkempt. They look messy to them. They don't look neat. And like I said, they're not little balls or little squares. There's just generally a lack of knowledge on HOA boards about native plants and landscaping. They just don't know those plants, because if you go into a big box store, what do you see? You don't see native plants. You see a lot of plants brought in from other places. Also, there's just a general resistance to change. We like it the way it is. We like these nice, neat little landscapes, and I don't want to see it change. So here is pretty much a typical acceptable suburban landscape. These are all, now these were taken in the fall, so the grass, or actually in almost winter, so the grass is not quite greened up yet, but this is actually my street. This is where I live. This is my neighborhood. And this is what most of the houses have. In fact, throughout Lantana, you'll find this type of landscaping pretty common. See those neat little shrubs, a tree in front of every house, and that's it. Sometimes they plant some seasonal color, but of pansies or something non-native, but that's it. So what about this one? This also happens to be in my neighborhood on my street. And this is more of what people think of when they talk about xeriscaping. This landscape still has a lot of non-natives. The agaves, the cacti are not really native to this area, those, at least not these species. And but those are still low water usage plants. So they're actually really pretty good because they have survived through freezes and droughts and all sorts of things. During the growing season, this homeowner puts in a lot of native plants kind of scattered in amongst the agaves and cacti. And so in the summertime, it's pretty colorful as well. It's a pretty neat little landscape, right? So how do we overcome challenges to the native landscapes? Well, my first thing would be to change the terminology. Xeriscaping to a lot of people means cacti, gravel, things like this picture here. It's not usually acceptable to HOAs in most parts of Texas. There might be a few parts out to the west, but this is not a typical Texas landscape. It just isn't. It's maybe New Mexico, maybe Arizona, but not here. So I don't know of any HOA in our part of Texas, at least, that would accept this. And then they often use the term wildscaping. And to a lot of people, they hear wildscaping and they think of a weedy patch, something wild, right? Something that isn't intentional. Um, so if we change the words to things like native landscaping, native plantings, pollinator plants, bird-friendly plantings, all of that sounds a lot more intentional and a lot less disheveled. Um, Water-wise plants, that sounds like a solution to a problem that we really have, our lack of water in all areas of Texas. The Native Plant Society has a definition of wildscape. And again, I would change that term from wildscape to native landscape. Um, they, they define it as a way of designing your home's landscape to attract and benefit birds and pollinators by providing the required food, water, and shelter. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that, right? We all want to benefit the birds and the pollinators. So how do you change that mindset? Well, first of all, educate, provide education. There are so many free speakers out there. You can provide speakers to HOA or community groups. Native Plant Society of Texas, I'll call it NIPSOT. The master gardeners, the master naturalists, the regional water districts like Upper Trinity, all of those have speakers who are willing to go and stand in front of a group and talk about native plants or bird-friendly plants, or planting for pollinators, planting to attract birds to your yard. Also, help educate people on the beauty, the plant choice benefits, the landscape principles, and maintenance. And landscape principles, I'm going to emphasize that again later. That actually is a pretty important part of making native landscapes palatable to any neighborhood. If you go online to any of those organizations that I mentioned, there are a lot of free handouts that you can print off and hand out to residents, or post to social media, or in your HOA's newsletter or whatever. So make those handouts available to the residents. It's just education again. And use social media for good. Post pictures of beautiful native landscapes in the community. If you come across one that's particularly striking, go ahead and post it and say, wow, this is a showstopper landscape. And guess what? They've used all native plants that are low water usage. And also find those landscape professionals that know and understand native plants and recommend them whenever you can. I know our HOA uses a landscaper. We have all our front landscaping provided, not landscaping, but mowing and cleaning up beds and things like that. They do not understand native plants. In fact, I don't use them at all. I have asked them to stay out of my yard, because the first year that we were here, they very carefully weeded out every one of the reseeding annuals that were popping up in my front bed. So that was the end of my relationship with our particular landscapers. And then there's more. All of the area water utilities are running campaigns everywhere. Every city, every regional water district, they're sending out materials. They're holding online and in-person programs like this one to encourage the use of native water-wise plants, to encourage reducing your use of pesticides and herbicides, because when those run off, the water supply company has to filter them out somehow. They encourage proper irrigation techniques and amounts, how to maintain your system, how often do you need to water. Through Upper Trinity, you can sign up for Water My Yard, and it tells you each week how much water do you need to use that week. You require 0 inches of water, and guess what? It's been 0 all winter long. So that's a great thing to give you kind of an idea. And it's hyper local. It's geared to your specific location. Area libraries have programs on native landscapes too. And if you see one of those, spread the word to your neighborhood that they're available. Those are free also. All of these things are free. It's something to be aware of. And then just kind of nibble away at the problem. You don't have to take great big gulps. Just nibble it away. Make it easy somehow for the non-gardeners to get started and help them understand it's not all or nothing. Even if you add 1 or 2 native plants to your garden, you've helped. There's something called Backyard National Park or something like that. I can't remember. I'll need to look that up. But basically it says if everybody would plant native plants, at least a few in their yards, it would add more native habitat than all of the national parks in the United States put together. So that's a pretty significant impact if we all would just do one little thing. Rooted In, I'm not shilling for Rooted In, but they do something that I just consider ingenious. And that's their Go and Grow boxes. They're actually taking orders for them right now. It's a box of 24 3-inch native plants that or natives or native cultivar plants that along with a professional landscape plan for either a triangular, circular, or horizontal bed. So what you end up with, it's basically landscape by numbers. You get the plants, you follow the directions, you plant, plop your plants in the plan that they've provided, and you have a professionally designed landscape. It's something I would like to see more of the nurseries do. In fact, I saw one, and I wish I could remember who it was, who are doing something very similar. They're talking about, although they haven't put the box together, they have a presentation, they tell you what to plant, where to plant, and then you can, of course, buy the plants from that nursery. So when somebody asks you where you can buy native plants, it's not always easy. Even Callaway's has a pretty limited number. The big box stores are really tough, but you can direct them to nurseries that are more apt to carry natives. And NIPSOT has a list, and I'll have a resource list later. But what they call the NICE nurseries, and NICE stands for Natives Improve and Conserve Environments. So start with those nurseries and just help people find them. There's a small number here locally in our area. So this is the approach I took. Work the system from the inside. Get appointed to the Architectural Review Board. I was appointed to the ARC kind of by accident, I guess. But when I was asked, Lantana was just starting an ARC that was resident run. And I jumped at the chance, mostly because I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. I wanted to have some say in the way that we approach this whole situation. Better yet, get elected to the HOA board, because they're the ultimate authority when it comes to the rules and regulations. Work with the HOA to plant native gardens in the common areas. And I want to really emphasize this, but it's also important to keep those native gardens in those common areas neat, so that people don't look at it and see a weedy something or, overgrown, or so that it doesn't look intentional. It looks like their worst idea of what a native planting is. But if you can have a decent looking native garden in the common areas, it can be a real great demonstration area for the residents, and they see those plants. In ours, we actually have so many, some of those things reseed themselves really prolifically, and so we actually give away plants So that's also something to think about. It helps expand because you can just give plants away. Um, Write new guidelines yourself to encourage the use of native plants. The board doesn't often understand what native plants are or what would be good choices. They maybe don't have quite as much education in this area. Not maybe, they don't. Um, so if you can create new suggested plant lists, present it to the board, don't make them try to develop something from scratch. I've actually done this again within Lantana. Of course, I presented 8 months ago, and we still haven't adopted the new guidelines yet, but we're getting there. So, uh, but I was lucky because Lantana's initial plant list included an awful lot of native plants as well. We had a good developer. Um, Lead by example. Create a native landscape that looks intentional. Okay. And NIPSOT offers something called the Native Landscape Certification Program. And they have classes, and those classes can really help. I mean, they are excellent for helping you understand how to create a landscape that looks intentional, that looks acceptable. Also, put a neat border around your plantings. And I can't emphasize that piece enough. That seems so simple, but it's probably where most people fall down. They don't put a neat border. And that neat border, it can be like a stone landscape border or, a brick border or say, something like that. Or it can even just be a well-defined piece of turf grass around your plantings that kind of separate and create a real sense of landscape beds. Keep the true weeds at bay. Don't let Bermuda grass grow up in between all your plantings. You have to keep the weeds down. And put up a sign. This really helps. It's surprising, but it does. That explains your native landscape. National Wildlife Federation has signs for certified wildlife habitat, and it's actually pretty easy to get your yard certified as wildlife habitat. You just have to prove that you've provided those things necessary for wildlife, and wildlife can be, pollinator insects as well. So food, water, shelter. You can get a Monarch Way Station sign from Monarch Watch. And again, on their website, they explain what's needed to have your area certified as a Monarch Way Station. There are cute signs, I mean, really cute signs available for purchase online. You can find them on Amazon, of course, but Etsy's got some just adorable signs that explain your native garden, what it is, why it might look seedier at different times of year, that kind of thing. And then NIPSOT just introduced a new sign too that explains, this is a native landscape. Lead by example. Follow the requirements. That's important. It's easier to ask. It is not easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Never. It never works out well if you do it backwards. So get approval from the HOA first if it's required. It's just a whole lot easier to do that. You can just do a hand-drawn plan, but show on that plan, don't just put little dots where you're going to put things. Show the full size of the plant. Show the bed filled in. Use colored pencils that show, I've got yellow plants here and pink things here, and so that they can see it's a colorful bed. It's full. Also, if you include pictures of the plants you intend to use, that helps those people who don't know what those plants are to visualize what you're trying to do. They're more apt to see, oh, I didn't know what that was called, but that's a really pretty plant, or that's really cool. This picture is just a showstopper of a native landscape. That's in Lantana. What you can't see, because I cut it off, and I'm sorry I did, is that alongside this bed there's a well-defined strip of turf. that's mowed, but it really sets off and defines this bed. And if you look at that bed, you can see it's very intentional. It's well designed. It has clumps of different plants. It's not just kind of thrown together. It is one showstopper. I love this garden. Make your yard a demonstration garden. Plant with purpose and use predominantly native plants if you can. But like I said, it doesn't have to be all native. Yeah, it's not, we're not the native plant Nazis or whatever. You can do whatever you want, but at least use as many as you can. Use a variety of plants so that you have color all year round. There are a lot of evergreen shrubs and vines and things that actually add at least green interest, even in the middle of winter. Make the beds look intentional. I can't, again, overemphasize this point. This is probably where most people fall down. You should have some kind of borders, cut back your aggressive plants. It doesn't have to look wild and out of control. It just needs to look intentional. Use the wildlife habitat principles of different heights. Different critters like to have different heights. Some live on the ground, some live up higher. So just plus that adds interest to your garden. Provide food. And food is not only the nectar from the flowers, but also the seeds. So leaving seeds on plants is actually a really good thing. My birds, all winter long, they have ignored my feeders except for the coldest days because they eat the seeds off of the seed heads from the flowers that bloom this summer. Leaves are important because they provide shelter. Maybe have a source of water, bird bath. And back to the food and leaves, sometimes we plant things like I plant passion vine because I expect it to be eaten. I love the Gulf fritillaries and variegated fritillaries that come along and eat the leaves of my passion vine, and then my garden and my backyard is just flutter all summer long with butterflies. Most importantly, keep your curb appeal high. Maintain that kept look, not an unkept look. And what happens if you are cited by the HOA? Well, don't ignore it. Don't just toss it in the trash and ignore it. Compromise wherever you can, wherever you think it's reasonable. Figure out what will be accepted. Come to an agreement. You might have to educate. You might have to be very patient, be respectful, but a lot of times that'll help. And go through the appeal process. Don't just say, I'm going to do what I want, and that's the way it is. Just go ahead and go through the appeal process, because that appeal process may actually help educate those who are against the native plantings. And what about the appeal process? Well, advocate for native plants. Educate, 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 educate. You're going to hear that a lot. Clarify which of your plants are weeds and what the native plants are and what their benefits are. And most importantly, natives tend to fill in empty spaces really well, and they help actually suppress the weeds. Play up your credibility. If you're a member of NIPSOD, if you've gone through the Native Landscape Certification Program, play that up. Say, my landscape is certified by the National Wildlife Federation. I have a monarch watch. I'm a monarch way station. Play up those things, and use recognized resources. Don't just pull weird things off the internet. Use things like NIPSOD's list, things from the Wildflower Center. There's an organization called Wild Ones that has lists. Texan by Nature, there are recognized resources out there that will help you show your board what is a native plant. And if all else fails, cite the law. I try to hold that for the end, unless I can see that they're really going to be, they won't budge, and then I'll bring it out right away. But in Senate Bill 198, passed in 2013, prevents HOAs from prohibiting the use of drought-resistant landscaping or water-conserving turf. And that water-conserving turf is kind of important too, because that says you should be able to plant buffalo grass, which doesn't require any water in the summer. But of course, that only grows if you have a really sunny yard as well. So it, keep that law in mind. HOAs can still require preliminary approval of any plans. All right, so it's not, oh, I can just plant what I want the way I want it. They do still have control over your preliminary plan. But it's limited. That control is limited, and they can't withhold approval unreasonably. It has to be reasonable and for a good reason. But HOAs can still require a certain amount of turf, that beds are clearly defined, they're neatly edged. You have to use certain types of mulching materials, that sort of thing. So just, again, be aware of those rules and try to see if you can't design your landscape within those rules as well. But if you can't, if they're withholding approval for some really unreasonable answer, keep fighting it. So let's talk about some success stories. And there are success stories. Louisville has a program. I said this isn't just HOAs, it's communities as well. Roots for Wings, what a great program. In fact, they're about to have another education session for their citizens. You have to be a Louisville citizen to take it. But it's the brainchild of Louisville's mayor, TJ Gilmore. And members of NIPSOT and the local chapter of Texas Master Naturalists wrote all the materials. The requirements for this program are that you have to attend this mandatory workshop. And like I said, it's coming up like really soon, within the next week or two. You have to fill out an application and include your plant list, what the space looks like, have that space inspected. And once it meets all the criteria, you get a yard sign, this cool Roots for Wings yard sign. Every 3 years, you recertify. And yes, people do come out, master naturalists come out and take a look at it, at your space, make sure you're maintaining it properly, help you with any problems you might have. The city is also still looking at its weed ordinances. They've made some changes, but you know what? The code officers still haven't all gotten the message, and every now and then there's a glitch, but that's easily overcome, especially if you've gone through the training of the program and you can cite, hey, I'm in Roots for Wings and this is my native landscape. And yes, it does go to seed at this point, and we have to let those seeds mature and drop to the ground, and then we'll cut it back. City of Denton has a National Wildlife Federation Community Wildlife Habitat certification. Again, it includes a sign. It really helps to have these signs in your yard. They just received their Bird City, Texas certification, and part of that is having native plants that will attract birds to your yards. They're a member of Bee City, USA. Again, native plants will attract our native bees, not necessarily European honeybees. It's not all about the honeybees. They are a Monarch City, USA, and they, like Louisville, are starting to plant open spaces and rights of way with native plantings. And that's important. It shows the residents that, yes, we are committed to doing this. This thing is just make it look more intentional. That's probably the most important thing. So he could have every one of those plants that are in that landscape, he could have if he just made it look a little more intentional. Wellington had a similar battle. The Rosencrantzes, they were master gardeners, and they were actually participating in a water conservation study. So they were planting lots and lots of natives. And they got cited by the Wellington HOA because they installed their landscape without prior approval. Now, the thing that Wellington objected to most, again, was that health strip, that area between the sidewalk and the road. Um, and if you look at theirs, it's very neat and it's not very tall. It's really not intimidating. If I was the ruler of the world, I would have accepted that. I think that looks great. But they got cited because they didn't go through they asked for forgiveness, not permission. And they in turn cited the law, as we said. And so they kind of won and they kind of didn't. They compromised. So they complied with the HOA to a point. So this is what their yard looked like after that, in October of 2023, so a year and a half ago. You can see they took out the plants that were in the parkway and replaced it with turf grass, with a Bermuda grass, sadly. But the rest of their lawn, they maintained all these native plantings. And you see they're bordered. Again, they were master gardeners, so they understood landscape principles. And, they had taller plants in the back, shorter plants up front, nothing encroaching on the sidewalk, little bits of turf grass surrounding their beds. I went in their backyard, and their backyard is terraced and actually just a profusion of native plantings. But again, it all looked really intentional. It's really a beautiful backyard area. So they compromised, they came to, and they still have their native plantings in their yard, and probably just as much diversity as they had before. So what's next? What can you do? Most of all, advocate for native plants. Just educate and do it politely. Just keep selling the benefits. Encourage people to start somewhere, even with just one plant. That's all it takes. Start with one. Plant a community garden and look for grants. There are a ton of grants available for community gardens from organizations like NIPSOT, Master Naturalists, the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Maybe in Lantana, I used our Lantana Charitable Foundation. So there's ways of getting grants to pay for what you want to do. Manage your natural landscape so it doesn't look unkept. It needs to look like it's intentional and kept and neat. And then plan activities and education during Texas Native Plant Week. That's a great opportunity, a great time to start educating just residents in general on native plants and how beautiful they can be. Here's a list of resources. I'm going to leave that up for a second if you want to take a screenshot of that. There's the mayor's Monarch Pledge has that guide to passing ordinances that are wildlife friendly. That's a great resource for either HOA or cities. Working with your HOA is a whole website from the Native Plant Society that has a lot of different resources. That's a great website, a great place to start if you need some resources. I included the links to Louisville's Roots for Wings program, and then Wild Ones DFW is another organization that has a lot of resources on their website on dealing with either cities or HOAs. There's a program in the Hill Country called the Pollinator Garden Assistance and Recognition Program, and that's one they used again in their community, where it's kind of similar to Roots for Wings, and where master gardeners, master naturalists actually, in this case, it was master naturalists and NIPSOT, again, giving assistance to residents on how to have a great looking native landscape. And then there's the link to the Senate bill, so you can read the whole bill for yourself. And then if you're looking for lists of native plants, what is native? That's sometimes really hard to find. It's surprisingly difficult if you go to a nursery to find out what is actually native. And a lot of times you really need to look at the botanical name, not just the common name, because there's butterfly weed, but there's a non-native butterfly weed and a native which is often called tropical milkweed, and a native butterfly weed. They look really similar, but one is actually kind of bad for monarchs, and another is very helpful. So pay attention to botanical names. Here are, of course, Native Plant Society has a great native plant database. They have this, why native plants, another good discussion. Our local chapter, Trinity Forks chapter, has some really great lists. They talk about shade plants, sun plants, plant this, not that type lists, and they're all native to our area. Texas is a really big area. I say that on that last one, the Wildflower Center, which is a wonderful resource, but you have to be really careful because what's suitable for the coast or for West Texas, or even for the hill country may not be suitable for us here. So you need to be cognizant of where it's native in Texas. Just saying it's a Texas native is not good enough. We're just too big. So if you snap a shot of that, there's some great resources there. The resource list for where to buy native plants in North Texas area, it gives the nice nurseries. If you don't want to key all that in, you can find it. You can just go to the Trinity Forks chapter website, and you'll find that resource list in our area. So there's a number of nurseries, and an increasing number of nurseries in our area. So that's it. This is a picture of, on the left, that's a picture of where that community garden in Lantana, that Monarch Way Station, started. And then the one on the right is what it looked like after 3 years. So that's something to remember with native plantings. They start small. They might start small, but there's a saying, it sleeps, it creeps, it leaps. And with all native plantings, that's really true. The first year, they just kind of stay there, and it looks like, and you go, oh my gosh, this is such a small little thing. But be aware when